I'm always surprised when people say that they don't know anything about the Song dynasty. Well, that changes today. Our story begins in the deserts of Arabia. There is little higher praise for a warrior than to call him or her master of the horse. For the men of the desert, being able to fight and survive on horseback was not just essential, it was everything. Here on the edge of the empire, life was hard, dry, and dangerous. As early as 1200 BCE, Arabian tribes raised horses in numbers and mastered horsemanship. That love affair between man and horse continued throughout history. Theirs was a culture of swift raids, moving quickly through shifting sands and hitting your target before they knew what hit them. These Bedouin raiders attacked Roman and Greek forces in the Levant and Mesopotamia. They raided along trade routes and ambushed isolated travelers. The nomadic tribes were constantly fighting other nomadic tribes, as well as outside powers encroaching on their territory. Soon these Arabian horsemen would become known as the greatest horsemen in history. But far to the east in the Indian subcontinent, horsemen also served powerful empires. The Indian cavalry of the Mauryan and later Rajput dynasties became vital shock troops, usually considered to be the elite of the army. Their ornate armor and bravery in battle made them objects of awe and reverence. Then in the 13th century, there was no more reverence when it came to horsemen. Fear is probably more accurate. Arguably, the most feared horsemen in history are the Mongols. Genghis Khan unleashed an unstoppable cavalry across Asia and Europe. Fast, ruthless, and brilliantly organized. His hordes numbered in the tens of thousands and were armed with composite bows that were fast and accurate at incredible distances. They rode out from the Mongolian steppe and swept all before them. Nothing stood in their way. No armies could stop them. By the end of his reign, the great Khan controlled an empire stretching from eastern Poland to the Pacific Ocean. His horsemen, under the leadership of his successors, would continue their campaigns for decades after his death. In the early modern period, Europe saw a golden age of cavalry innovation. This was the time of the heavy cavalrymen, men who rode massive horses clad in iron armor. We associate knights with this time period, although technically, a knight was more of a rank rather than a style of soldier. Still, these armored horsemen did resemble medieval knights in many ways. Some of the most famous horse soldiers of this time will have names familiar to anyone who played a strategy game. The Cossacks were free-riding frontiersmen from Ukraine and Russia. They were both fierce warriors and cultural icons. From the 15th century onwards, these horse soldiers roamed the open fields of Eastern Europe, living largely outside the law. While they served in imperial wars against the Turks and the Poles, they were often employed in border conflicts where their freedom of action and intimate knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable. Although initially associated with the Polish nobility, the Hussars were first a Hungarian military formation. However, they soon caught on across Europe, dazzling on the battlefield. They were known for their wings, their uniforms, and their courage. They were terrifying and theatrical at the same time. One writer captured their essence when he said, "There is something so imposing in the hussar costume that the very sight of them produces an effect upon spectators. They must be seen to be appreciated." But while the hussars struck fear into their enemies, they were often also beloved by the people they rode through. As a symbol of royal power, the dragoon was a hybrid force that rode to battle but often fought on foot. The term dragoon originally referred to a heavy cavalryman who dismounted to fight on foot. By the 18th century, they had evolved into a type of light cavalry used for charges and skirmishes. Also popular in this time period, the Uhlans were the Polish and later German lancers. They carried long, slender lances tipped with sharp metal points and wore distinctive pointed helmets. They carried on the cavalry traditions of the Middle Ages into the modern age. But perhaps their most tragic moment came at the Battle of Karansebes in 1784, when friendly fire led to hundreds of casualties. The incident remains the deadliest friendly fire incident in history. But if there was anyone who was ready for such a tragedy, it was Napoleon Bonaparte. A master tactician, he understood the importance of cavalry and kept them as a key component of his army. His cavalry was meticulously organized and was commanded by Napoleon himself. At the height of his power, the cuirassiers, lancers, and chasseurs charged into the chaos of war, helping define the era's battles. Across the globe, the horse soldier took on new roles as Europe industrialized. leaving wider frontiers in its wake. But we will deal with those frontiersmen in another episode. For now, let's jump ahead to the 19th century. As Europe industrialized, the horse soldier found new roles in the wide frontiers of North America. In 1835, Texas declared independence from Mexico. The following year, they created a military force that would become known as the Texas Rangers. Originally formed to protect settlers from Native Americans, they were also sometimes tasked with chasing down outlaws and cattle rustlers. Armed with rifles and six-shooters, these men rode into the wilds of the American Southwest on horseback. To the north, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, then called the Northwest Mounted Police, patrolled the western frontier. These men rode across the prairies to enforce Canadian law and order. They were often the first responders to crime, settling disputes and bringing criminals to justice. Today, the Mounties are known for their Mountie hats, Stetsons, and horses. Meanwhile, during the American Civil War, cavalry units performed reconnaissance, raiding, and quick strikes. Though overshadowed by rifles and trenches, horsemen remained critical on both the Union and Confederate side. Even in southern Africa, the battlefield was changing, but the horse soldier was still useful. The Zulu horseman, though traditionally an infantry, adapted to colonial warfare and occasionally used horses during the Anglo-Zulu conflicts. During the Second Anglo-Boer War, the Boers used commandos that included horse soldiers. Though the Boers preferred hit-and-run guerrilla tactics, horses allowed them to travel long distances quickly and harass the mighty British Empire. Their intimate knowledge of the terrain meant that they knew where to find water for themselves and their horses, and how to use the landscape to their advantage. The British ultimately won the war, but the horse soldier's adaptability was clear. At the turn of the century, the horse soldier reached new heights, even as the end of their golden age approached. In 1898, Cuba was the setting for a conflict that became famous for its charge up San Juan Hill. There, a volunteer cavalry led by future President Theodore Roosevelt stormed up the heights. Known as the Rough Riders, this ragtag bunch of cowboys, miners, and Native Americans fought alongside black soldiers from the 9th and 10th Cavalry. It was a brief chapter, but it revived the romantic image of the American cavalryman. But that romance would soon meet the steel of modern war. During World War I, cavalry units like the Canadian Cavalry Brigade charged early on. The open trenches of France and Belgium were a surprise to most. Machine guns and artillery proved deadly. Horses slaughtered. But in 1917, the Australian light horse executed one of the last great mounted charges at the Battle of Beersheba. The Ottoman forces had fortified the town, blocking vital water supplies from reaching the British. The attack was fast, bold, and unexpected, securing a crucial victory for the Allies and cementing the Anzac Mounted Division's reputation. The age of mechanization ended most cavalry. But in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan during the 1980s, Soviet tanks couldn't go where mules and horses could. Afghan horsemen among the Mujahideen used traditional methods to resist a modern superpower. Soviet forces couldn't navigate the difficult terrain, couldn't reach remote villages, couldn't deliver their payloads accurately. But Afghan horsemen could. They were excellent trackers. They were familiar with the terrain, and they knew how to navigate the region's high mountain passes. We think of the Wild West as a time of gunslinging cowboys and saloon brawls. But don't forget the horse soldier. Theirs was a unique brotherhood forged in the saddle, bound by a love of horses and a life on the frontier. From the deserts of Arabia to the steppes of Mongolia, from the highlands of Afghanistan to the plains of North America, the horse soldier has thundered through history. Their impact on world events is immeasurable, their bravery unparalleled. Though tanks and drones now dominate the modern battlefield, the spirit of the horse soldier endures, in legend, in culture, and in songs like Horse Soldier by Corb Lund. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's mounted warriors, continuing history's tales with each video, consider giving us a follow here at Almanac Passage.